welcome to Relationship Helpers. These are your hosts, Vincent and Laura Ketchy. If you've been joining us the last few weeks, you've been listening to our series on anger and marriage. Just a recap on the topics that we've covered so far. We've discussed how to avoid the blame game. Do you magnify the problems in your marriage? What do you call your spouse? And this past week's episode was, do you read your spouse's mind? This week, we're going to be talking about complaining. The title for today's episode is Complaining Ruin Your Marriage. If you're involved in any social media, you inevitably have run into followers or friends who are chronic complainers. You may have felt so inclined to hide them from your news feed due to the sheer negativity that they permeate. Social media has made it easy to avoid these complainers with the unfollow feature. But what happens when you see this person day to day, face to face? Even worse, you can't exactly unfollow your spouse if he or she happens to be a negative Nelly. Maybe even worse still, what if you are the chronic complainer in your relationships? So today, in today's podcast episode, we are addressing a term called over-generalization.
So you're talking about complaining.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about today. And complaining is maybe not the main reason couples come to us for couples counseling, but it is definitely a part of it.
Well, true, yes. And I guess for anybody, it's pretty easy to think of someone who complains a lot. Now, it's just, you're talking about Facebook or social media, and it just seems like there are certain people that do that, and then there's certain people who of course, a lot of people just put their best face, or they only put their positive things on there, and then there's other people who only put the negative things on Facebook, these complainers, who never have anything positive to say, or rarely.
So social media is not necessarily the most authentic version of yourself.
No, I believe people
put on there what they want people to see.
Pretty much.
Yes.
Or trying to get feedback from it. They put on what they want people to see, and that they want people to respond to, I guess. I don't know. I mean, some people it's just to share pictures with family members, but for others there's
some motive behind it.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the example we just gave of social media is just one example that we feel that many people can relate to. So let's give a definition of overgeneralization,
right,
so people kind of have a better grasp of what we're talking about, because believe you me, I think overgeneralization has been a part of your life in some capacity, whether it's because there's someone else that uses it towards you, or you use it towards someone else, or you have a family member. Let's just give that definition.
Right.
So
would you like for me to give that definition?
Sure.
Overgeneralization is making one single event into an unbearable situation. It's really kind of similar to that
magnifying.
Yeah, magnifying.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of making the mountains out of molehills, or magnifying. Similar to that, but it's making this one single event into an unbearable situation, and sometimes these thoughts are or other times, these thoughts are expressed out loud, these generalizations. And usually the words that are used with these overgeneralizations are nevers, evers, these...
always.
Right. These are kind of these extreme...
very strong words.
Yes.
So some examples may be things like this. Church is always boring. No one likes me at school. No one is a good example there. No one.
Right.
I'm always the butt of jokes. Everybody thinks I'm stupid. So, Vincent, with married couples, what would be some examples that you may hear?
Well, or may hear, or do hear, I guess. Are you saying with us?
I'm sure we've been guilty of quite a few.
Yes, I guess both of us do some of this to a certain extent. I guess
we're working on it.
Yeah, we're in work in progress here. Yes. I mean, it can be you never take the trash out. I'm always having to clean up after you.
You never listen to me.
What? Yeah, you never listen to me, or you never take time to spend with us. We never go out on dates, or just time for just the two of us together.
You're always on the computer.
I am. Oh, it's getting personal. No, or yeah, you're always on social media. There's one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that does happen a lot. Always on or always on your phone, or you never pay attention to me. Yeah, well, you already said that one. That is a big one, though.
Yeah. Actually, I said you never listen to me, but okay.
Okay, yeah, it's very similar.
Yes, very similar. All right, so I think everybody gets the idea. Never's, always, everybody, no one. Those are the kind of words that people use when they're overgeneralizing.
Yeah, or you're always letting the kids get their way. You're never telling them no.
So basically what they're doing is they may be taking the truth out of a situation, which it may be true in one moment.
Yes.
But it may not be true for all times.
Yeah, and it may be even true for more than one moment, 2 or 3 or 4 other moments there as well.
But they're making that sweeping...
A sweeping generalization.
Yes.
That's how it is right then. And for the other person, it really annoys them.
Right.
Because they're thinking of, hey, we just went on a special date last weekend. What do you mean we never go out on dates?
Or I just listened to you while we had this conversation, and a lot came out of that conversation.
Right, or you never realized that I picked up after you just yesterday. All you left there, you didn't realize that you left on the ground, or how you didn't clean up out in the garage, or whatever it may be.
So let's take a look at how overgeneralization comes to be. I find a lot with working with individuals that overgeneralization comes with depression and anxiety. It's negative thinking habit.
Right.
I like to refer to these as thought traps. So things like overgeneralization that we're talking about this week, or things like magnifying,
mind reading.
Yes, those are good examples of those thought traps as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what a thought trap is if you're struggling to understand what that means. It's kind of like a cassette tape. So if you're a child of the 80s, you'll totally get what we mean by a cassette tape. It's something that loops over and over again, and it's a thought that loops over and over again in your mind.
Right. Once it ends, it goes back to the other side.
Yeah.
Right back around. But yes, it kind of keeps going. Right.
So
if you don't stop it.
Yeah. So if you're struggling with depression, it's like you're hitting the repeat button over and over and over again. You're hearing the same negative self-talk, the same internal dialogue going over and over again. But the problem is the person that's hitting the repeat button is you. And so you have to be the one responsible for changing this thought habit. Your spouse can't do that.
Yeah. And then in a relationship, though, when this is going on, we talked about in the beginning the social media, and that people were specifically putting out certain things on social media for reactions from other people, or trying to get something out from other people. Well, in a marriage, this complaining is very similar. They're trying to get something out of the other person. They're purposely, well, I say purposely, maybe they could be doing it subconsciously and not realize it, right?
They're trying to get a rise out of the other one.
Right.
Especially in situations where someone says you never, that is kind of trying to incite something right there.
Right. And so when I'm with my couples, I like to go over communication and communication styles, I guess, and I call this one of the styles that you learn. This is something that you learn to do. This isn't something you just come out the gate doing necessarily, but I feel like this is what you learn to do. And so complaining, or this overgeneralization, which many times it comes across as complaining, is what I would refer to as being passive-aggressive. And, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I think it would be good if we take a closer look at passive-aggressiveness in marriage.
Okay. So let me give you a definition. This is the definition I like for passive aggressive. It is the failure to meet the expectation of others through deniable means. Okay, let me say it again. It is the failure to meet the expectation of others through deniable means. And for this instance, the complaining, the deniable means is whatever they're complaining about. Let me give you an example. And this is an example I like to use to give my couples. There's tons of different ways that people can be passive aggressive, but this is definitely one of the big ways I feel like spouses are passive aggressive with each other in marriage. Let's say that you go as a couple to a social function. Let's say it's at church, or it could be at somebody's house. You're with other couples there, and you're talking. There's a group of you talking, and one of your spouse says something that embarrasses you. They say something about you didn't really want other people to know about, and it was kind of embarrassing. Well, you're all cool and everything in the group there, and like, no, it doesn't bother me. And then afterwards, your spouse says, are you okay? Or, did this bother you? Well, if you're passive aggressive, then when they confront you about this and ask you if you're mad or you're upset, you respond with, no, I'm fine. Everything's cool. So you do not address the conflict. Mm-hmm. You do not
actually express your feelings.
Yeah, you don't express your feelings.
You're not being authentic.
You're not being authentic, and you do not want to have any confrontation, so you say everything's fine or that I'm okay.
So in an attempt to avoid conflict, this person tells an untruth.
They do, but what they're doing is they're being passive. Mm-hmm. So they're passive with the spouse face to face. When the other spouse asks them how they're doing, they're passive. They say, no, everything's fine, everything's great. However, let's say later on, let's say that happened in the afternoon, and later on in the evening, the other spouse says, hey, let's go see this play that's at the theater, or let's go to this ball game, whatever it may be. Well, if you're passive aggressive and you say to them, yeah, everything's cool, so you're like, yeah, sure, I'll go. When you're really mad at them, but you say yes, you'll go. But when you get there, let's say you get to the theater. When you get there, you get inside and the show's getting ready to start, you start saying things like, oh boy, this chair sure is uncomfortable. This is one of the worst chairs I've ever had. Right here, this back right here, do you see how that is? It's just, oh boy, this is so hot in here. Oh my goodness. Oh, it is so hot. Whew. Or you say, oh, did you see that? That acting's terrible. Or wow, oh my goodness, that prop just, I don't know what they were doing there, that. Oh, you're cringing. Well, anyway.
Your theater references are interesting.
Oh, okay.
But wait, I think our listeners get the point.
Okay,
we get the point. You're basically saying that the passive aggressive behavior is coming out in ways where the person is complaining because they never really express their true feelings. What they're doing is they're diverting all that energy to complaining.
Well, they're complaining about the environment around there
rather than being direct about their feelings.
They're not complaining about their spouse and what they did, but they're complaining about everything and that is the failure to meet the expectation of others. The expectation of the spouse was that they would go and have a good time, but they're not having a good time. They're being negative, they're complaining, and they're doing this through deniable means. The deniable means is the environment. They're complaining about the seat. They're complaining about how hot or cold the air conditioning. They're complaining about the actors. They're complaining about the props. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, so Vincent, over time in a marriage, continued complaints accumulate.
Sure.
If something's not done, if there's not a better link in communication, if over time the spouses are unable to be direct with one another and express their true feelings, there's an awful lot of accumulation of negativity and walls emerge.
Yes, this resentment builds up.
Which eventually can become stonewalling. after there's been enough complaining. But we maybe
it can be stonewalling. It can be, they don't want to have sex with their partner. I mean, that kind of thing. There becomes that wall there where they're not able to be intimate with each other. Mm. I mean, it could keep going. The other could be spending money, going on these shopping sprees, not telling the other, like, well, they deserved it. That's passive-aggressive. They continue to do not just complaining as passive-aggressive, but all these other things. Or talking to their mother about their spouse, or talking to their whoever about their spouse, instead of actually, because gossip's another way of being passive-aggressive. Mm-hmm. So there's all these different ways that people or spouses can be passive-aggressive to their partner, to their spouse. And of course, one of the ultimate or the worst ways that this could keep going or keep progressing, I guess, is the spouse having an affair on the other one.
So we've just taken kind of a quick leap here from complaining to an affair, but I think it's important to point out that it's the small things over time when not addressed.
Right. When they're not talked about, when they're not processed, when they're not discussed, all of these accumulation, all of this anger that accumulates up can build up to that wall, can build up to that resentment.
That affair. It doesn't justify it, however.
Yeah, maybe not an affair, but it could be just spending money recklessly.
But many times people use it as an excuse.
Yeah, they're like, they deserve
abandon
that.
The marriage. Yeah, or
they did this to me. They made me mad. They deserve it. That's what the spouse having the affair thinks in their mind. They may not say it out loud. They may say it out loud.
Actually, Vincent, now that we're talking about it, I think affairs are the ultimate in passive-aggressive behavior because they're done secretively.
Right.
And there's not direct communication.
Right.
And it's done a lot of times out of resentment. So really, I think the affair is like quite possibly one of the most passive-aggressive behaviors there are.
I feel like it is in marriage. It is definitely with marriage. To me, that goes to the ultimate passive-aggressive thing that they can do. I mean, of course, like I was saying, other addictions can be passive-aggressive as well. If it were, even in the sexual realm, if it was pornography, or if it were, like I said, the shopping, or if it were gambling, or if it were substance abuse, but...
Okay, so let's take a look at what the chronic complainer should do. If they recognize this about themselves, what should they do to work on themselves and overcome this negative thinking habit?
Wow.
Okay, so I thought maybe we'd take a look at some complainers in the Bible.
Complainers in the Bible?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yes. What do you mean?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so... the Israelites were trekking through the desert, and they'd been there a long time, and they were pretty miserable.
Right.
And the Lord literally rained down manna from heaven. It was God-made food readily available at their feet. After a few days of God-made food readily available at their feet, the Israelites got tired of it, and they complained. Notice I didn't start the story off with the Israelites got tired of manna and complained. The Israelites lost their focus on God and focused on themselves.
Right, and this is after he had already sent all those plagues on the Egyptians and parted the Red Sea, and after all of, giving the 10 Commandments and doing all this kinds of stuff, they're complaining.
Right. So we can see the different difficulties highlighted in the Old Testament about, what they went through in terms of, being away from their homeland and being enslaved. So you could see how this could create within them what we may as therapists call deep-seated soul wounds.
Right.
And when you have that kind of trauma or those kind of wounds in your life, not unusual to develop negative thinking habits or these thought ruts.
Right. Well, when you've got those deep-seated soul wounds, which is always from something that happened previously in your life. Many times it was from childhood. Many times, but not always just childhood. It could be an earlier relationship.
And it's interesting that we're bringing this up right now, because I know one thing that many clients struggle with is, why do we as therapists want to bring up their childhood so much? But it's very important for them to see how linear this is. It's like, okay, so X happened when you were a child, Y happened when you were, a young adult, and now Z, this is the behavior that you're exhibiting as a result of resentment, unforgiveness, some kind of trauma. And so it's important that, we have an understanding of how the trauma or hurts that have happened in our lives shape who we are, how we think, and how we behave towards other people.
Right, yeah, we're not wanting, I don't want to go to childhood. I really don't. If it was just 2 or 3 years before, we'll just deal with that, which sometimes that's the case. However, with adults, many times it will go back to at least somewhere in your childhood from 0 to 18, and that's what I mean by childhood. Well, and I find, of course, with counseling, the older you are, many times, the longer the counseling takes to help you. Well, you're
more rigid. You're more set in your ways.
You are. Well, it's been a longer period of time. Like if I get a teenager, let's say I get a 15, 16-year-old, and I start working with them, oh my goodness, it's amazing how quick that they can turn things around.
They're still growing.
Well, they are, but even those soul wounds weren't so long ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, they can't be too terribly long ago. I mean, if they're 15, at most it could be 15 years.
So the negative habits that may have sprung from that wound haven't fully developed yet, maybe.
Well, they're not as solid. They're not been there as long, especially, And
they haven't had enough time to be in relationship with people for it to play out so much.
Well, maybe not so. Yeah.
That's why we see married couples that struggle so much, is because the wound happened in childhood and they've been married 30 years and they've had 30 years.
Or they've been through 2 marriages or however, they dated, 7 people, and each one of them they broke up with, and they ran off when things got tough or there was confrontation. I see this happen a lot, that's what happens. You'll see these patterns in these relationships. Not just the marriage relationship, but the relationships before then.
Okay. So I think we've, covered what complaining, one of the big complainers or groups of complainers in the Old Testament. I'd like to take a look at some New Testament complainers. Jesus encountered a lot of different people, a lot of negative people actually, and he was tested by complainers. To me, it's always interesting to study how Jesus responds to people in the Bible. If you'll notice, when he's approached by complainers, he never validates their behaviors. Mm-hmm. He was a really great teacher. He always turned a complaint into a learning opportunity. When someone complained, he responded in a way that would force the complainer to look at their own hearts. In essence, he helped the complainers expose the ugly parts of their hearts.
Right. He didn't condone their complaining or whatever negative coping mechanism, if it wasn't complaining or if it was magnifying or if it was blaming or if it were, what were the other ones? Mind reading. Mm-hmm. He doesn't condone those activities, but yes, he goes straight to more of the heart of the matter.
So this is Jesus as counselor, really.
Sure,
this is Jesus as counselor.
Of course, which I say Jesus, he was assertive, and what I mean by that is yes. He is direct and honest in a loving way.
He spoke the truth in love.
With grace, yes.
So if you're starting to feel like the well-fed Israelites we were talking about a little while earlier, where you complain a lot, maybe we need to take a look at, your heart. The great thing about God is that he provides. One of the most powerful tools he has created for us is prayer. When we pray his will, it's like we have a direct line to the boss. Even better, remember this, when we accept Jesus, we accept that he's already saved us. We're already seated with him. When you pray, you're praying from a position of victory in the heavens. Ask Him about the areas in your life that you need to be open for Him to work on.
Right, so definitely going to God and getting your direction.
And as I mentioned,
mindset.
as I mentioned above, this is about His will, not yours, or not our own. He wants us to recognize how and what He has provided for us. It's very difficult to chronically complain if you chronically rejoice through gratitude. So if you're chronically grateful, I mean, if you are constantly speaking about how you've been blessed and you're blessing other people, then you can't complain. So another figure in the Bible that I think is really helpful.
Well, let me jump back. So this is talking about yourself. How can you work on yourself? But I also think when Jesus was talking to these complainers, He was giving us a model of how to handle them, address them. And I say this with my couples. They'll ask, well, what do I do when my spouse is doing this? What do I do when my spouse is doing whatever it may be? Let's say they're magnifying light. Let's say they are, not doing chores, or they're not taking care of the kids like that they want, or they're complaining. And or at least the short answer is be like Jesus, what Jesus was doing in these situations, and He was, as we were just mentioning before, Jesus was being assertive. Jesus was speaking truth into the situation, but He was using grace to give that truth. He wasn't yelling at them, but He wasn't whispering at them either. He was approaching them and talking to them directly, honestly, calmly, and addressing the issue and really the heart of the matter. So, if you're in the situation where your spouse is complaining a lot, or whatever the situation may be, then this is your time to be assertive with them. And I have clients that are like, I'm afraid to do that. If I do that, they're going to complain more on me, or they're going to blow up on me, or I'm afraid they're going to attack me, with verbally attack. And they're afraid to be assertive. They're afraid actually to speak the truth in a situation. And I feel like what happens is there's this fear that takes them over. And speak of fear, we just had our dog to come into our room.
As it thundered.
Fear is overtaking Daisy right at this moment. But fear, I feel like that's what happens with these spouses. They're fearful of being assertive. They're fearful of speaking that truth. But as I was saying, I actually had just recently a client who began, amazingly, just to be assertive. That's not, it's just like speaking the truth. So they would, an example would be something like this. I really appreciate how you notice when things are out of place. I'm just making this up. But, honey, it seems like you are really being a little too critical, and it makes me feel uncomfortable when you're always pointing things out. But I would really like for you to let me know about these things, but would you just work? I just asked that maybe you would work on not talking in such a, rude tone.
Harsh tone.
Yes. Yeah, it's okay with you talking to me about it, but just not in a harsh tone. So that would be a way of being assertive with your spouse. And well, amazingly, with one of my clients, when they started doing it, they were amazed at how responsive their spouse was when they spoke the truth. But here's the big thing: they were not just speaking the truth, but they were speaking the truth with grace. They were calm. Their body language was calm, relaxed when they told their spouse that.
It wasn't reactive.
It was not reactive. It was extremely intentional.
That's the really cool thing about being assertive. I find when I'm explaining assertiveness to clients and trying to help people as they're working through conflict, that there are times where you're able to behave assertively, and if you work just so, you will be able to discuss a matter that is difficult, that seems like a conflicting, something that would be of conflict, but you're able to do it in a way that's there's not even a hint of conflict in the tone of it.
Right.
So you literally you may have an issue with somebody, and you're actually able to discuss it with that person without it ever escalating or becoming anything because of your approach to it.
Right. And here, let's go back to that very beginning, like Laura was talking about. Before you address your spouse about that, before you're assertive with them, my recommendation is you pray. You pray individually, get your heart in the right location, and rely upon God to give you not only the words to say, but when to say them, how fast to say them, when to listen, when to, touch your spouse's knee or hug them when they feel comfortable. But to be in tune in the situation, to be in the here and now during that, and ask the Lord to help you with all of that. Okay. So it's almost like God can give you almost like a finesse to conflict resolution. Well, He wants to work through you.
Yeah. And
you've just got to be willing to allow Him to. We just hold Him back.
Right. And so now both dogs are fearful of the storm. Yeah. But anyway, yes, God can use you in a way to resolve conflict in a way that it may not even seem like you're in conflict when you're having the conversation. And that's how I try to teach clients conflict resolution, is you have in mind what you're going to discuss, but the entry point... Mm-hmm. The entry point to the conversation is done in such a way that the other person doesn't even know that they're in a conversation about something that's so serious and so difficult, or
right.
They don't even have a chance to escalate or react because it's performed in such a way that it didn't even dawn on them that it could be something to fight over.
Right, yes. And this does happen. I have clients do this. I just had one this week in a very difficult situation, and they were amazed at what happened.
They were assertive. And it resolved.
It resolved, and the other person was, well, unless, I don't know, repentful. Repentant.
Okay, repentant.
Yeah, whatever that word is. They were changing their behavior. They were actually responding to what they said in a positive way.
All right. Well, I just want to leave everybody on this note. I want to make mention of one more figure in the Bible before we wrap up today's episode, because I think we would be remiss not to talk about Paul and the character of Paul. So in other episodes that we've talked about anger and marriage, we've talked about Paul. He's a great example to fashion our lives after. He withstood a great deal of trials, being in prison many times, and endured all sorts of persecution. Yet the man always recognized God's blessing and was grateful for his salvation. If we lived out our salvation daily, what would that look like? I think it would mean we should often have gratitude and grace on our lips.
Most definitely. We should be focusing on the haves instead of our have-nots.
So we hope you take those bits of wisdom today and apply them to your relationships. And we hope that you carry these thoughts into your hearts and work on yourselves and maybe unearth some new things about yourself that you see that you would like to change, and that you can approach that in a prayerful way and talk to God about it. And we hope that you're able to apply these to your marriages and work on conflict resolution through assertiveness. And we hope to have you listen to our next upcoming episode where we're going to be talking about demanding in marriage. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening. Have a good day.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.